Hi there, Dr. Rob here, your biosafety advisor. Do you realize that you're at risk every day of something bad happening to you? You actually take risks every day and don't even think about it. But if you learn more about these risks and the hazards that create them, you can take precautions like this mask to lower the risk and better protect yourself. So today, we're going to learn the difference between a hazard and a risk, how to evaluate that risk or do a risk assessment, and why it's important to do one. We all have our own idea of what risk is to us. To define it, risk is the probability and consequences of an adverse event. That's something bad happening. So, in order to determine how bad it can be, we do what's called a risk assessment. A risk assessment is the process of identifying if something bad might happen to you, your assets, or the environment, and then make your own decision based on how much risk you're willing to accept. You actually do risk assessments every day. For example, when you drive, cross the street, eat, or do online transactions. All activities have some level of risk, and that level is determined by two things. What's the chance the activity will lead to a negative outcome, and how severe will that be? For instance, what's the chance a pathogen like COVID infecting you? A low chance? A high chance? And if you do get it, how severe could it be? A cough or hospitalization? Another example is, if you smell milk and it smells bad or off, your risk assessment says to you, if I drink that, I'll probably get sick. So you make the decision not to drink it. As you see, a risk assessment is something only you can do for yourself, as everyone's situation is different. Factors like age, genetics, your lifestyle, where you live, and many other factors influence how much risk you're willing to accept and how you manage that risk. Shown here are the steps of risk management. To see how these steps work, let's use influenza virus as the hazard in this example. First step, gather information and learn. Learn about the hazard, where it is, how it's transmitted, and what it does to you if you're infected. In this example, the CDC estimates that flu has resulted in 9 to 41 million illnesses, 140,000 to 710,000 hospitalizations, and 12,000 to 52,000 deaths annually. The more you learn, the more educated decisions you can make to better protect yourself. Next, evaluate the risks. What's the chance of you being infected, and how bad will it be if you get it? Think about your situation. Do you come in contact with a lot of people on a daily basis that you might get it from? Are you older or more susceptible to catching the flu? Do you think you have a low chance or a high chance of getting it? Due to the COVID pandemic, more than ever, people are questioning their activities and thinking about the risk of getting infected. When thinking about risk, you first have to realize there has to be a hazard, that thing that can hurt you. In this case, it's the pathogen. Without a hazard, there is no risk. So please don't confuse hazard and risk. They are not the same thing. In the example of the flu, the hazard is the influenza virus, and the risk is of you getting infected. For instance, say you were in a room with 10 people and one had flu. The hazard is the virus, but the risk of getting infected would be pretty low. However, if all 10 people were infected, the hazard is still the influenza virus, but now the risk of getting infected is much higher. See the difference? You can also look at risk on a timeline. First is the chance the event will occur, then the actual event occurs, and finally, there are the consequences of that event. We tend to focus mainly on the consequences of the event because it's easy to see and it personally affects us. As a real-world example of risk assessment, let's use flu again. First, we recognize that the hazard, the influenza virus, resides in people and is currently circulating within the community. So there is a risk of you getting infected. Then you understand that your actions can alter the chance of getting infected. For example, wearing a mask or not will influence your chance of infection. It's at this step, your actions, where you have the greatest influence of altering the risk of you getting infected. Lastly, if you do get infected, can you alter the consequences? Unfortunately, in most cases, there's little you can do to change the outcome. So, of the three parts of risk, hazard, probability, and consequences, remember, you have the most control over probability. That's why they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Now to quickly review what we learned. First, a biological hazard is anything that can hurt you, and risk is the probability and consequences of that hazard causing harm. A risk assessment is your determination of how risky a situation is. And remember, you have the greatest influence over the probability of that event occurring. Do a risk assessment so you can take the appropriate precautions to reduce your risk. Biosafety is all about reducing the risk of an adverse biological event. So, remember, first, determine the hazard. Second, evaluate the risks. And third, determine what precautions you need to take to protect yourself so you can be safe, be biosafe.